My name is Ed Maher. First of all, I'll put my disclaimer up, as you saw in the film. The views I'm going to give to you are not of the Health Physics Society or my employer, Dave Moeller, but they are my views, and I'm responsible for them. I'm a practicing health physicist the last 35 years, and notice what a health physicist does. We're the ones who do radiation protection, not only in a power plant, but also at a medical center, at the universities, for all the industrial users, and in government. We're also regulators. My initial impressions of the film is that what a nice, artful job, but it's missing a lot of facts from the scientific standpoint.
I'm ultimately opposed to nuclear power, and we can talk about that.
I'm John Todd, of course, Nancy's husband. Hillary, congratulations.
Thank you, John.
That was a fine job. You managed to overcome the talking heads with some, classy footage. My association with the nuclear industry is that for many years, when I was an oceanographer, they funded my research into the effects of certain changes on marine ecosystems. And so at that time, I made it a point of trying to understand a little bit about the industry. I was also very influenced at that time by Nancy Jack Todd, who was very involved in nuclear issues. But I think what shaped me more than anything else was the accident at 3 Mile Island. There were a group of us working together on Cape Cod, and as the radioactive cloud started to blow up our way, we planned an evacuation, but we just couldn't figure out where to go. And the terror and the feeling that went through us, surrounded by our kids, was just unbelievable to narrate. And at that time, I said to myself, if we get through this, there has to be another way.
Arnie Gunderson, if you're taking notes, it's S-E-N with Fairwinds, and there's an E in that too. I live here in Burlington with my wife Maggie, and she and I run the company Fairwinds. It's a great website. We've had 7 million visitors since Fukushima. I've been on at CNN as their expert, and Governor Shumlin appointed me to the Vermont Public Oversight Panel, and I'm the one who caught energy execs lying under oath. I like the film a lot. I think it takes the religion out of it. This isn't about being pro or anti, the agnostic approach to this. It's about money. It's about, does this make sense when you look at all of the externalities? Does this technology make sense compared to what we've got in the 21st century?
My name's Howard Shaffer, ex-nuclear submarine officer. I walked into my first reactor plant in 1963 in the desert in Idaho when I walked into the prototype for the Nautilus submarine for training. I've been in the industry all my working life with short exceptions, going back to graduate school pump storage project. My first retirement activity in 2000 was to go as a congressional fellow to Washington for the year 2001 under the auspices of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, sponsored by my professional society, the American Nuclear Society. It was a great way to see how our government worked and understand how policies are made, and helps me understand how we got to where we are with nuclear power. It was by choices of the Congress. I'm a licensed professional engineer in nuclear engineering in the state of Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Illinois from my years working. I was a startup engineer at the Vermont Yankee plant, 2 plants in Taiwan, and finished working in Illinois at 2 plants there. To put this in perspective, what the film left out when it talks about alternatives, and the film is a great film for what it does, what it leaves out is how do we get from here to there. With 50% of our electric power coming from coal, 20% from nuclear, and an awful lot of petroleum going into transportation. The EPA's recent press release on their proposed cross-state border air pollution rules are this. The justification for the rules. These rules on coal plants will prevent every year 34,000 premature deaths, 15,000 non-fatal heart attacks, 19,000 cases of acute bronchitis, 400,000 cases of aggravated asthma, 1.8 million sick days off from work, and 280 billion of medical costs. That's from burning coal. That's why Congress picked nuclear power in the 1950s, and compared to coal, and for answering the question, how do we get from here to there when we're all solar and all wind and something else, nuclear is the best choice. The film leaves out, what do we do tomorrow? Do we shut down all the coal plants tomorrow? All the nuclear plants tomorrow? That's the political question.
And so briefly, who are you guys? Quick show of hands. Who's a student here at the university or a local university? Whoa! That's the big audience. Who's staff or faculty at UVM? Okay. And who is a community member not attached to UVM in any way? All right. So, and which of those students who are here because you got extra credit for riding? Oh boy. Okay. So the floor is yours. I'm gonna moderate, take questions and answers, and we'll try to equally distribute along the line here, and get into issues both that come from the film, but obviously focused on the future of nuclear power. So who wants to start? Yes, in the back.
So, Vermont Yankee, there's been a lot of back and forth in the movie so that it had been renewed. I've heard that it's still bundled up in the system somewhere. I don't know if you guys know more information about that.
Well, bundled up in the system, you mean the license?
Yeah.
Okay, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is a lead federal agency, has issued a 20-year license extension. So they've got that. There's another issue going on. It's a suit between the state and the NRC about whether or not they need a water quality permit from the state. The state issues those under the federal authority. I think I'm getting this right. And there's a question about whether they need a renewal on that, not only for the nuclear plant, but for other things. The state has extended those permits, apparently, when there's no changes to it. The other issue going on is Entergy has sued the state saying you can't do this because you're preempting federal authority, and I think there's other things that the state of Vermont violated by voting after the fact, after the memorandum of understanding, to say the Public Service Board can't issue its findings, which might allow the plant to go on for 20 years. So it's a big technical tangle. That's where it stands right now.
So a good summary. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, one thing on that. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has never not granted a 20-year license extension. I mean, it's a given. You apply, you get. But the other thing is, it's a Mark I design, which is exactly like Fukushima, you know, that containment is very susceptible to the problems of Fukushima.
I need to comment on that. Vermont Yankees, a Mark I. Dresden 2 and 3 are Mark I's. Qinshan 1 and 2 in Taiwan are Mark I's. I was in all those plants. The fact that the Fukushima reactors that had this accident, this terrible accident, were Mark I containments is irrelevant to the containment design. If you took any other reactor of the current designs, leaving out the pebble bed reactor, and you lost electric power long enough, you would have a meltdown and damage to the core. Maybe not release of hydrogen that would explode in the building, but at least release of hydrogen in the building the same way. So the containment design is not relevant to the accident that occurred.
I disagree, but go ahead.
Howard, is that sufficient, or you have more?
Alice, let me comment on that. First of all, I don't think Vermont's in a seismic zone where a 9.0 Richter scale is going to happen. Never mind the Connecticut River giving you a 46-foot tsunami. That's just not going to be the set of circumstances. Japan has a different problem. They are built on a seismic. The whole island is a seismic zone. If they're going to use nuclear, they're going to have to mitigate out the hazard. I don't think that has it, that potential, but that probability can occur at Vermont Yankee.
Okay. You guys are going to, okay, I guess we'll go right down the panel here then. Nancy.
I was just going to say the earthquake on August the 23rd, I believed, released much more radiation than predicted, and it was an absolutely unprecedented level of earthquake which was centered in Virginia, but it had reverberations all up and down the East Coast, and it released a lot. radiation.
All right.
Who produced it?
We're one question in, so let's go back to the audience now.
For the health physicist, you mentioned that there were a bunch of facts that you thought were missing from the movie. I'd just like to get an idea of
Yeah,
what
well,
they are.
for instance, the comment about the radiation-free, you want to live in a place there's no radiation. I think that one of the gun scientists made that point. How many of you are radioactive here? I just want to know. How many have radioactivity in them? So can you get to a really non-radioactive area? No, you can't. So to me, that doesn't make any sense to say something like that. We live in a radiation environment, cosmic, terrestrial, what we eat, what our body produces. We just can't escape it. The question is, how much? The dose is the poison, as is always the case. Second point, we don't have a waste policy. Well, that's a great one. We had a waste policy. The waste policy was Yakima. And this administration, well, I would just say, the prior two administrations dragged their feet on it. We do have a $40 billion facility for at least the retrievable storage of spent fuel, which would take away a source term from the 104 reactors we're operating now and mitigate making the accident potential smaller, but we refuse to use it. The second thing we could have done, which is what again, the presidential decision back in Jimmy Carter's time, is that we're not going to reprocess fuel. The French and the British reprocess all their fuel. It's not really a waste. It is a product. It has value, and we can make new fuel, medical isotopes, consumer products like smoke detectors, with what we take out of those rods. We just refuse to do it. So it is not a scientific issue. It is a political issue if we have the will to do the right thing.
Oh, I had a question going back to Vermont Yankee. My understanding is that when Entergy bought it, they signed a memorandum of understanding agreeing not to contest the way Vermont established authority over the licensing process that would look at water quality and environmental impact. They signed a memorandum saying they wouldn't contest that. So now they've gone to court to break a contract they signed. Your presentation of it was, well, the other side is going to court to break the contract. And it's not my
No, that was on the water quality. On the memorandum of understanding, I've read it, and I'm not a lawyer or doing that work, but as a citizen, it said, we will follow the Vermont law, which existed at the time. After the fact, now, I asked the question as a citizen, if the legislature was so interested in being involved, why weren't they a party to signing the memorandum of understanding? Why didn't they pass this law before, saying the legislature will take a vote before the memorandum of understanding was signed? Now that it's a contract and the legislature wants to break that. No.
Laws change. Well, we don't need to do this. It's just I wanted the audience to hear there are other interpretations of the nature of the legal case that's going on.
Yeah, from my point of view, the legislature violated the Constitution by passing a law that changed an existing contract.
I read recently that thorium is a safer element than uranium, and I was wondering how you feel about the future of nuclear power with thorium instead, and why we haven't transitioned to that instead.
It isn't safer. Thorium is a metal, 2 atomic numbers lighter than uranium. If you put it in a reactor, you breed it to uranium-233, which becomes a fuel. So you have all the same issues. The point of thorium is that it expands our fuel supply greatly. And with in spite of what was said in the film of 30 or 40 years of reactor fuel, that's not correct. From the beginning, it's been planned to use uranium-238 bred to plutonium. Now, breeding thorium, you run out to about 1,000 years worth of fuel for 7 to 10 billion people on the Earth.
You know, I don't know if you're going to spend all that money subsidizing thorium and developing a new technology, and it's going to be 20 or 30 or 40 years before we get to enough reactors to make any meaningful sense. Why don't we look at the alternatives? In the 20th century, we needed central power stations. But in the 21st century, we don't need them anymore. Building central power stations now is like building the Maginot Line. It's fighting last century's war. And in fact, what's happening now is we've got distributed generation. We can have bloom boxes in neighborhoods and solar and wind and things like that on the hoods. We can move away, and in fact, cost-wise, a new nuclear plant is about 15 to 17 cents a kilowatt hour in Florida, where I'm testifying. Solar's at 20 right now. Solar's crashing, plummeting down because Germany has really given the incentives, as one of your professors said, to force the technology. And now we're getting to the point where solar's cheaper than nuclear. Wind is at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So why are we having a discussion about another nuclear technology when the paradigm allows us to consider distributed processing with smart grids?
I have a question. What I'd like to see is an analysis of how many wind generators or solar panels would it take to power the city of Burlington, Vermont? How big would these farms need to be? Because I can't believe people in here like the look of a wind generator farm. Knocks out the trees, clears out a ridge, and it just is plain ugly.
Garrett, did you want to comment?
Wait, sorry, one answer. I don't have a number, but you can put solar panels on roofs.
I agree. Can you power industry with solar panels in Vermont?
Gary, you jumped up first.
All right,
I'm sorry,
so
I
just, Burlington uses 50 megawatts peak. So the average wind power plant these days is about 1.5 to 2.5. So you could figure out how many you need if they were running at 100%, which they're
in
not.
this space, which
But the fact is that the McNeil plant generates 55 megawatts. So it could power the entire city. That's a form of solar energy. That's biomass. And the area of land where they're harvesting forests is from a 75-mile radius around Burlington. So that doesn't answer your question, but it could provide all the power for Burlington from a single power plant, which is maybe not distributed, but like I said, wind is 1.5 to 2.5 megawatts per unit. You know, for 50, you're looking at 25 plus the capacity factor being 30%. Multiply it by 3, and you get the area you need. It's substantial.
It's substantial.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have that area in like a Boston where I'm from. I mean, there isn't enough woods around Boston.
Well, you can make the same argument for a nuclear plant if you counted all of the mining and all of the industry and processing and how much of an area does that take up?
But centralized generation does have a value that you don't have to do it where you're using it, and so that's.
Well, we can shove that off on somebody else. Okay.
Yes, that's what happens.
There's a ooh question right here. Okay.
Well, I just actually wanted to also. I was going to also mention the biomass plant at McNeil, and I think that really brings up the point is it's not, well, how many wind turbines does it take to power this city? It's that there's a lot of different options, and it's figuring out what the best one for each location is. Like, you're not going to talk about biomass in Arizona, but there you do have a really strong solar capacity. And in a lot of it, it's a really political issue. Like, there had been a discussion, especially when UVM was doing a lot of construction, about using combined heat and power. That actually came into, UVM is such a big buyer of electricity in Burlington and the BED district that if we stopped using that much electricity and that much energy to power UVM, then it would actually drive up rates for the rest of residents in the city. So it ended up being, for everybody, not being the best option in that case, but it's that sort of political entanglement that makes it difficult to move forward and create choose the long-term best decision. So.
I just want to, John, you're being conspicuously quiet. Want to jump in on any of this?
Everybody's being so articulate. I'm enjoying this.
You're taking notes? Is that what's going on? Are we still on this, or should we jump to a new question? Okay, let's jump to a new one.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the panel's feeling is on adding a 20-year extension to a plant that's already 30 years old, and it was only designed, when it was designed, they said it was designed for 30 years, so why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the actual design number, or the original contract was for 40,
Yeah,
right?
the original design, which included not only the engineering, but also the financing, and was very conservatively picked. Judgment had to be made to pick a number, and they picked 40 years. Experience has been gained as we went along. If the plants couldn't last that long, they would have been shut down before now. Some have been, mostly for economics. What has been found through experience is there was a lot of fat built in back in the days before big mainframe computers. And with the mainframe and the advanced technology and calculations we have now, we know how much fat was in there, so we know that it's safe to go on longer. With the proper maintenance, just the way you can keep a car going, and with replacements and so forth. And that's NRC's job. They've looked at it, they've done a thorough review, and of course the crack has always been made. They've never not renewed one because it costs a lot of money to apply for a renewal formally. Just like your car, you can ask the mechanic to take a quick look at it, and if he says it isn't going to make it, you won't bother paying for an inspection. It's the same with the NRC. People have done that. They've talked to the NRC informally, which you can do, and said, yeah, you've got too many problems, and they've closed down the reactors.
Well, usually like when my car breaks down a couple times, which has happened at Vermont Yankee, they've had a couple problems already with their cooling tower collapse, leaks of tritium to the ground. You say, hey, maybe it's time for a new car. Like, these small problems add up over time. Well,
and look, you could always have those fixed on your car, and look at the antique cars that are running around too. It's a difference between technology and economics. The technology is it's safe to go ahead.
I'll give Arnie a chance and then we'll go to
especially these Mark 1s, and there is a difference in this Mark 1 containment. I've actually been an expert in front of the NRC saying that the 23 Mark 1s should be shut down. 3 weeks before Fukushima, my wife and I were walking around the neighborhood one night, and she said, where's the next accident going to be happening? And we do a lot of expert reports. Where's it going to happen? And I said, I don't know where, but I know it's going to be a Mark 1 containment. So, this is Mark 1. Now we're on Mark 4s for these boiling water reactors. It's the difference between Windows 3 and Windows 7. If you like Windows 3, you should keep running with it. Just keep plugging right along. You're talking about 4 generations of improvement have occurred on these Mark 1 reactors. And I think they should be shut down.
Wasn't there a memo back when that said that these...
The Hanauer memo. Stephen Hanauer wrote to he was a high-level exec in the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, and he wrote to another person who basically said that we should shut these down, but I don't have the courage to do it because it will ruin the first nuclear renaissance. Yeah. It's on my website if you need it.
I was just curious as to if it's not nuclear power, then what renewable energies do you guys see as like the most viable? Which should we be subsidizing and like implementing and trying to bring and develop even more?
I think we're on the right path now, and as a nuclear engineer, but also a grandfather, first of all, nuclear power, to be for it, doesn't mean you're against conservation and efficiency, doesn't mean you're against solar power and wind, and making a transition to a fully sustainable society, which the film sort of implied. But I still ask the question, what do we do tomorrow with the coal plants? And how do we get from here to there? How do we provide power to keep the economy running and people employed? That's the political question that everybody who's in favor of wind and solar and shutting down nuclear power right now has to answer. What's going to be the effect of that? As well as shutting down coal right now.
John, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just a couple of things to answer partly that other question. I think the ultimate solution is going to be very definitely place-based, which has been mentioned earlier. You've got a large mix of energies, and the one that's right for your community or your region may be different than another community. But there is such a broad palette of solutions that shouldn't be a stumbling block to anybody or any community. So I think that's the answer to take, is that it isn't a single technology. The other thing that I would recommend, and I have to confess to not doing it as well as I should, is we need to pay very close attention to Germany as it tries to make a fairly rapid transition to a renewable energy-based society. There's quite a bit of literature coming out. As a matter of fact, the journal that grew out of the gun called Solutions has had an article recently on the strategy that begins at the political level and permeates down through the economy in Germany, and how that's going.
Nancy?
One renewable that hasn't been mentioned is tidal power. On Cape Cod, we have a neighbor by the name of Alexander Gorloff, and he has designed a generator which is powered by tide. They're currently being installed along the coast of South Korea, And when there'll probably be about 10, no more, hundreds.
There will be enough to be equivalent to 4 nuclear plants, I believe.
They're guaranteed not to harm any wildlife. And they're said to be the equivalent of 4 nuclear plants and be able to provide all the power that will be needed. And we've had them tested off Cape Cod.
Okay, Ed, and then we'll
Yeah,
bounce
I
back.
think ultimately, I think most of us agree, I guess most of us, that the economics are going to play a big role here. But I'd also like to introduce the issue of dependence, interdependence. Right now, we're not going to get off of oil anytime soon. It'll be years and years and years. What do we do if the unstableness of the Middle East turns off the spigot? What do we replace it with? Is energy independence an important issue here, which is not being brought up?
I believe that this alternative energy we started it mostly because of global warming. Global warming is done by or predicted by computers, and scientists are using certain constant. If they use different constant, they get different outcome. What happened if real global warming will be catastrophic? Instead of gaining 8 degrees, we may gain a lot more. Or if constant will be different, we may get to global cooling. Wouldn't it be smart to build some, or be ready to build nuclear power plants just to cool or heat our cities if global warming or global cooling will be catastrophic?
The nuclear plants emit less carbon than the per kilowatt than a coal plant by 10 to 1, maybe even 100 to 1. But the nuclear plants emit 40% more heat in the form of waste heat to a body of water per kilowatt than a coal plant or a nuclear plant. So if you look at a body of water like the Connecticut River, when Vermont Yankee was built, there were 70,000 shad that were heading upriver. Now there's 16. 16, not 16,000, 16. And the riverkeeper, Bill Dean, has told me that those are his numbers, and I've got the reports if you need them. So the issue of heating the planet can be from global warming, but it's also from heating the rivers. If we were to shut Vermont Yankee down, we would increase global warming by about 0.0001 degrees, about a 10,000th of a degree. I figured that out by the total quads that the world generates and the quads that Vermont Yankee generates. But we saved the Connecticut River for shad. So it's not like there's other thermal issues in building a nuclear plant that you don't have with a windmill or an alternative.
In Siberia, the Soviets built 2 nuclear power plants on the outskirts of the city in Siberia, and they use the waste heat from the power plant to heat the city. So it can be done. It's a question of the local economics and the need. And it's not a nuclear question.
Just sticking with the economics part, a lot of the folks in the film talked about the externalities and how those aren't incorporated. I gotta think when I'm paying $3 a gallon for gasoline, I'm not paying any externalities that are associated with that. Can anyone provide some sort of comparison? I hear people often demonizing nuclear power because of the mining, but they don't say, well, they don't talk about the mining impact from coal. So can anyone provide a comparison for me and the subsidies?
Yeah, the Union of Concerned Scientists looked at the externalities applied to nuclear. And they said if we really had factored those in over the development of the technology and all of the subsidies, it would add about 5 cents to the bill. So a nuclear plant like Vermont Yankee produces power at around 5 cents. It would essentially double the cost at the bus bar from the power plant. But they didn't compare it to other subsidies elsewhere. The nuclear subsidies amount to 5 cents.
Yeah, so I have no way of knowing whether that's better or worse than any other fuel. So in and of itself, that doesn't seem like that helpful.
Yeah, precisely. Union of Concerned Scientists, an avowed anti-nuclear organization, look only at nuclear power. The Canadian government asked this question more than 30 years ago, and Herbert Inhaber did the first studies for all the options from ground to back to ground, mining, manufacturing, and everything. He looked at that and he looked at the numbers, and it turned out that nuclear was second best to natural gas, but he wasn't considering global warming at the time or using up gas. Okay, so there's plenty of people, and matter of fact, the Washington Post just reported 2 days ago on a study that was done looking at all the externalities. And in the bigger picture, our society in the past has not put a cost on externalities like CO2 in the air, heating water. I think from an economic point of view, to get the right answer, the government ought to put a tax on all of those things. The CO2, the carbon, and everything else. Then we get the right answer.
How do you guys feel about nuclear reprocessing and the pros and cons behind doing it as maybe not a solution, but as helping out in the storage and making the waste amounts smaller?
Yes.
Well, it would all but eliminate the waste issue and all the issues of Yucca Mountain and all that. I mean, the French have been doing this for years, the Brits do it, it's worked out fine. It's really valuable stuff, spent nuclear fuel rods. It's just, it's a political will to do it. And, you know, part of it is you have to build a plant to do reprocessing. And it's the NIMBY, not in my backyard, it's like prisons or whatever else. Somehow we have to get away from that. Now, Yucca Mountain was ideal because, oh, it's out in Nevada, there's nobody around for like 80 or 100 miles. But, you know, the politics were that the Senate leader doesn't want it there. And so that's the political problem. Now, Jimmy Carter stopped fuel reprocessing. His fear was proliferation. Because in the fuel rods there are some plutonium. And theoretically, you could steal the rod and strip out plutonium. I don't know how you do it and not be detected or not kill yourself, unless you've got a fuel reprocessing. But that was the reason why in the Carter administration, fuel reprocessing was rejected. I think it's valuable. I think we should do it.
I disagree on that. First off, it's a lot more expensive to get. Reprocessed fuel is millions more per year than just taking it from the earth. So reprocessing is more expensive than just taking it from the earth raw. But the other issue is, you know, reprocessing is, the French have been doing it, but they're building up enormous amounts of waste that they haven't disposed of either. And in fact, they're shipping some to Siberia. And so the picture of reprocessing is nowhere near as clean as what he said. So reprocessing, one, is expensive, and two, I don't believe that the French program is anywhere near as successful as what it was just represented as.
You can't make weapons from power reactor fuel like Vermont Yankee because of the physical changes that take place. You cook it too long, you produce a mixed plutonium. If you want to make plutonium for weapons, you have a reactor that runs on a special cycle with the fuel in there for a short time. In fact, and this is very ironic, the Chernobyl design is the proof. That was a reactor, and the Soviets built many of them, designed to breed plutonium-239 for weapons at the same time it was making electricity. And in order to do the physics on the fuel, you have to do online refueling, which means you're plucking the fuel out of the reactor while it's running. The Canadians do that too. But that is the proof. But once the fuel's in there too long, it's no good for weapons. So you can't make weapons from normal power reactor fuel. If you could, people would be doing it. They never have.
It doesn't seem like there's too much dispute about whether renewable energies such as wind sources are the overall goal. It seems like the dispute is about whether we should be using nuclear in the transition time. So I was just wondering what, like the opinions of the, for those of you who are against nuclear as a transition, how should we change the political culture right now as to be backing like paradigms of renewable energy technologies instead of, you know, backing like nuclear or coal?
Agree that if we could, you know, run turbines and solar panels and provide all our needs, not say to our grandchildren, you can't use as much energy or you can't expand like we did, then I'm all for it. I mean, I agree, it's a better alternative. But we can't power cities and power industries and plan for the growth of the population by just using solar and wind right now. And if we did so, what would we do to the landscape? So I do feel that we're stuck with oil and gas, oil more detrimental than any of it. I think we should continue with nuclear. And maybe nuclear is not going to be here 30, 40 years from now, or whenever we get to this point. But it is going to fill a need right now. And the other thing we didn't talk about, the film did talk about it, is the new reactors. You know, I heard somebody say, oh, I don't want to hear this story about the new reactors. Well, we haven't built a reactor, a new reactor design. The design we're working with now, the Mark I, is 1950s, 1960 design. Now we have, you know, retrofit certain things. The plants aren't static; they're always being remodeled with other things to it, reinforced. But we haven't got a new design on the table. There's lots of designs out there. There's a conference I went to 2 weeks ago in US, where they have traveling wave reactors that can produce 500 megawatts in a very small footprint and have auto shut down. Basically, if something goes wrong, it shuts itself down. It's no longer a light water reactor, and that's the problem. If you lose water, that's the problem. That's what happened to Fukushima. The actual plant withstood the earthquake and the tsunami. It was the not being able to cool the fuels what caused all the problems. So, you know, there are other designs out there that maybe we ought to be looking at to fill the gap. And maybe we ought to doing some of those rather than to relicense. I don't know, that's a good question. I mean, I feel confident the relicensing process is looking at the structural integrity of the plants, that we're not taking additional risk, as the film mentioned. But I also think that bringing some of these new reactors on board, they're inherently more safer. And also, this traveling wave reactor produces 1/6 the waste of the light water reactor. We have better technologies. Why are we trying to retrofit the Pinto?
Just as a quick... Don't jump to the middle first, and then we'll jump out. Okay. Arnie, go ahead.
I don't think, we have 104 nuclear plants in the country. We're not going to shut them down. That would be crazy. But the bridging technology to get us to that renewable future is probably going to be natural gas, because that's what the money dictates. Natural gas is cheaper than anything we have right now, and will be for the foreseeable 10 or 20 years. I'm an expert down in Florida, and they're trying to build 4 nuclear power plants. The 4 plants will cost $50 billion when they're done. And that will double the total cost of all the power plants in the state. And it will produce 8% more electricity than they've got right now. So the cost of these huge new nuclear plants, and one, they don't come online for 10 years or so, is so astronomical that I think the market, if the market were paying for these, unfortunately it's done through loan guarantees and things like that, but if the market were making this decision, we wouldn't be building the new nukes to bridge the gap. It would be gas and boom boxes, and it would be distributed generation, and we'd get to the future you want. But the issue of new nukes, I think, we wouldn't have them if they weren't subsidized.
Yeah, we have built new nuclear power plants since 1974, when the world nuclear industry, which cooperates. We've built them, the Mark IIs in this country, just in the GE line. We built the Mark IIIs, but overseas. And the advanced plants are being built overseas, going up in China and Finland and France right now.
All right, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and ask one closing question, because a lot of the second half of the film really talked less about nuclear in particular, and more about, do we need all this power? You know, the efficiency piece is sort of doing more with less, but there's a lot of people talking about doing less with less. Like, and the one comment came out about the per capita energy consumption that Americans have compared to other industrialized societies like Europe. I wonder if each of you on the panel could talk about just getting from here to there. Does it mean staying on that trajectory, or do we have to sort of come to terms with that all of these power choices have risks? All of these power choices, many of them depend on non-renewables. So maybe we can go right down the line and address that question. Start. Go ahead.
My answer is, looking at it as a grandfather and looking back in history in my family, no, we don't need to be using as much. I remember the expression my mother used, gee, do you think that grows on trees? There was this societal perception that the environment was an unlimited store of resources and unlimited sewer. And all our houses and our buildings and everything else was built that way. It's going to take a long time to change all our houses and our buildings over. When we build new buildings, but when we retrofit the old things. So my answer is yes, we can do a heck of a lot better as far as using a lot less and protecting the environment more. The transitions are what takes time.
Arnie?
Yeah, I think that if you think of conservation as changing your light bulb and driving a Prius, we're going to lose. We really need to change our entire mindset about how we live. You know, the French per capita consumption is about half of what ours is. They live in smaller houses. They have one TV set instead of 4. By having close packed people, they don't have to commute 50 miles to a job as often. It's going to require, as a society, a rethinking of our mindset about how we live. If you want to live in a McMansion, then we're going to continue on the trajectory that we're on, which is unsustainable. We need to rethink the whole package and not just change our light bulbs and drive Prius.
If you just take one example, by the way of background, I design and build complex systems that are primarily made up of living organisms that do work for society. If you look at a conventional sewage treatment industry in this country, it uses so much electricity that is a major contributor to global warming. We can design a complete substitute for that conventionality, and have all over the world, that uses a quarter or less of the energy and does a better job solving the problem of making clean water out of you-know-what. And so there are all kinds of examples that when you begin to think of a conceptual redesign of our infrastructures and our support systems, the opportunity to get along and maybe as little as 10% of what we currently consume to solve our problems, food, shelter, and transportation, and so on, is possible.
Well, of course I agree with my husband. I think we should think in terms of quite a long-term transition, using existing energy sources towards a sustainable future, which will be far the safest and easiest to do. And in the meantime, I think it's up to all of us as individuals, families, communities, cities, to look at the option for sustainability whenever we can and explore those options and try to stay away from, with climate change being such a large issue, we have a means of having this conversation among generations and with each other, and using the impact on climate as being a way of presenting the argument for sustainability.
Well, I don't think anybody can argue that when you get your electric bill each month that it's worthwhile trying to save those kilowatt hours. And there's an incentive there for doing that. Beyond that, I don't have a lot to say what NSTAR does and how it makes its electricity. I am a little concerned with the thought that our children have to do with less than what we have. I'm not sure that's the right answer. You know, maybe it's part of the answer. I know if I pulled the TV out of my daughter's room, I'd be in big trouble right now. but you know, I wouldn't have to think we have to sacrifice going forward. We have good technology. We just have to put it to work. And we have to get out of our political environment that we're in that says we can't take any risk and not in my backyard. And once we get through that, I think we can provide the need. I don't think the trajectory is going to be like it's been over the last 50 years. I think it's going to level off. It's been leveling off. But I think that telling the next generation you have to do without is, I don't think that's a great idea.
Well, I want to thank our panel, if you guys could join me.